Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome to the third session of the deep dive into Nizam al-Islam. In the previous session, we discussed the definition of revival. We answered the question on whether man needs revival or not. We mentioned why man needs revival and how important it is to the human being. and we mentioned that the revival makes man better than the animal. And we also mentioned that even if a person is not revived, his mental faculty lifts him above animals. But the mind is not something that utilizes itself on its own. Rather, man chooses to use it or not. And this is a matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke of when he said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, lahum qulubun la yafqahuna biha wa lahum a'yunun la yabsuruna biha wa lahum adhanun la yasma'una biha ulaika kal an'am bal hum adall. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying they have hearts, they do not understand with it. They have eyes, they do not see with it. They have ears, they do not hear with it. Ulaika kal an'am. Verily, indeed, they are like livestocks, and the livestocks are not just any animals. They are animals we eat at home. They are like domesticated animals, and the usage of that word is to indicate how foolish people that don't use their minds are. And he ended up saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended up saying, Balhum adal, rather they are even worse than them. So based on this, we can drive that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that the person that does not use his mental faculty can even behave worse than an animal, because the animal operates based on a system. The system of that animal is dictated by his vital energy, by his vital energy. And his vital energy is divided, it can be divided into two, as we mentioned, the organic needs and the instinct. So that's why, as opposed to a human that also, despite having the same vital energies, he has the mental faculty, which is meant to give him like an edge over animals. But man's refusal to use his mind makes him even worse than an animal. But the whole point of discussing that is understanding the importance of thought. Now, in this session, inshallah, we will discuss how thought affects human behavior. Because if we're discussing revival, we need to define the scope of influence that revival has, meaning what does it affect? In the previous session, we mentioned the manifestations, the possible manifestations of revivals. And we mentioned that it could manifest religiously, it could manifest scientifically, it could manifest socio-economically. And we mentioned that all these are actually false notations. And what I mean by that is that to say that revival has to manifest in one of these images is a gross misunderstanding of what revival is. Although we give examples of situations where revived civilizations manifested in different ways, but we also mentioned that the key to revival is not whether there is scientific progress or religious progress or socio-economic progress. Each of the civilizations that ever achieved revival did not do so by simply achieving religious progress or scientific progress or socio-economic progress. As a matter of fact, a truly revived nation, as we will inshallah see in subsequent lectures, a truly revived nation should be able to achieve religious, scientific, and socio-economic progress. And we will see why that is so. Okay, excuse me. So the ultimate point here is that the way man thinks the way he sees things, the way he understands them, should be able to influence his actions. But before we go into that, we need to understand what thought is. We have been discussing thought, ideas, okay? And we mentioned that thoughts are ideas that explain the reality of matters, okay? Thoughts are ideas that explain the reality of problems, issues, and whatever is it you have an idea of. If we say this person has a thought about a certain matter, it means he has an idea about it. And when we say he has an idea about it, it means he has an explanation about it. But there is often a debate, or rather a discussion, on whether thought differs from ideas. First, I would like to mention that the discussion about whether thought differs from ideas is all a matter of nomenclature, meaning terminology. Okay, some use the word thought interchangeably with the word idea. Okay, and some tend to differentiate it. Now, for our own purposes, there's quite a difference between thought and idea, and it's all a matter of understanding the reality we're discussing. The reason these terminologies are usually coined or thrown out there is in order to make it easy for us to understand certain realities. Now, thought is so on thought, to understand what thought is and how it affects us, because as I mentioned, in the end, it's all about how it affects human behavior. Okay, it's all about how it leads to a person, how it leads to the revival of a nation. Okay, and the effect of revival is that it influences the behavior of that nation, the way that nation behaves. But how does it do that? How does it do that? This is the purpose of this session, inshallah. The Sheikh said, hence, and we are continuing from the green section. He says, hence, in order for man to revive, yanhad, it is necessary to radically and comprehensively change his current thought, fikr, and generate another thought, fikr, for him. This is because it is the thought, fikr, that generates the concepts about things and consolidates them. Man shapes his behavior, suluk, in this life according to his thoughts, mafahim, about it. So man's concepts, mafahim, about a person he likes, shapes his behavior, suluk, towards him. This is in contrast with his behavior towards a person he dislikes and holds concepts of hatred. Also, he will exhibit different behavior, suluk, towards a person he does not know or holds any concepts, mafahim, about. So human behavior, suluk, is linked to man's concepts, mafahim, and when we wish to change the behavior, suluk, of the declined man and make it refined, it is imperative to change his concepts, mafahim, first. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah does not change the circumstances of any people, of any nation, until they have changed what is within themselves. Surah Al-Ra'd, verse 11. Now, as I mentioned, that thought is supposed to affect the way we behave. And that's what revival is all about. Now, you might say that, okay, this is jumping from just one place to another, because we were discussing the issue about the question of what preceded this life and what will come after it. And then suddenly now we are jumping into how thoughts affect human behavior. Now, the reason for that is these concepts, these thoughts, these ideas, sorry, not concepts, these thoughts, as I mentioned, thoughts are explanations about realities. Okay, so these thoughts about what preceded this life, what comes after this life, about man himself, about life, about the universe that we live in and the things that it contains, these end up giving us perspectives. The way we answer these questions, and I believe we mentioned that in the previous section, the way we answer these questions, our answers to these questions determine the way we see the world. Because at the end of the day, the explanation I have about myself as a human being, who am I, where I came from, am I going anywhere? If there's any place that I'm going to next, where is it that I'm going to? Determines the reason I'm here. That's it. These answers determine the reason we are here in this world, in this universe. It gives us meaning. It defines if we are living for our own sake, or if we are living for the sake of someone else, or essentially it defines who we serve. Do we serve ourselves, which ultimately means serving our desires, or do we serve someone else? Answering these questions help us clarify this. And by doing that, we acquire a perspective that directs the way we behave. Because in the end, the way we see something determines the way we behave towards it. And this is, if you look at the example the Sheikh gives, it's an example that hits the jackpot. Okay, he gave an example with just between you and someone. You just met someone. You have an idea about him, that you like him. But the question we need to ask ourselves here is, okay, if you see someone and you like him, you will behave towards him favorably. And if you meet someone that you dislike, you will behave towards him unfavorably. And if you meet someone that you don't really know, you will have a mixed behavior towards him, trying to figure out the kind of person he is before you know the way you're going to relate, whether you're actually going to stick to this person or not. But in the first place, the question we need to be asking in this place is, how do we determine that we like someone or not? Because if you look at it closely, you will notice that different people have different ways of seeing things, which means the reason I like someone might not be the reason another person likes him. Or maybe the reason I like that person might be the very reason that someone dislikes him. And the reason that another person dislikes someone might be the very reason I or other people or another person likes him. And this is the point we are making here. The reason that happens, that you find out a person has the same attribute, different people describe him with the same attribute, but despite doing that, some of them end up liking him or disliking him simply because he has that attribute, is because of their different perspectives. How did they acquire these perspectives? These perspectives, it's based on the answers or lack thereof. Okay, maybe they answered the questions and maybe they didn't actually answer them. Now, as I keep mentioning, let's be a bit patient. The correctness or the incorrectness of the answer will, inshallah, we will be discussing that subsequently. But the point is, we need to understand the foundation of all the discussion here. Now, what's the nature of thought? Since we have agreed that is the thought about man, life, and the universe, what preceded this life, what comes after this life, the relationship of all these matters that we have been discussing. Do they have any relationship? Do they not? The answers to these are the thoughts, are the basic thoughts. They are like a collection of ideas that help us have this perspective and help us give these judgments that we do. But what is this thought? What is it specifically? Thought is simply, and let me give a technical definition. Thought is a transfer of the transfer of reality through the senses to the brain, with the presence of previous information by which this reality is explained. And what this means is that thought is not just something that's present in our body, and it's not something that we acquire by just looking at a thing. Okay? Because if that were the case, by meeting someone you don't know, by just meeting him, you'd be able to say he is likable or dislikable. Okay, you might be able to do that, but why are you fairly unable to do that? It is simply because you do not have the you do not have the relevant parameters that establish thought about a thing. Okay, so first we say that is the transfer of reality through the senses, which means the reality has to exist. It has to be an object or someone that you can sense, meaning it has to be an individual, a living thing or a non-living thing. Okay, now and these things all make up what we call the reality, the things we can sense. And the senses are 5 types: our eyes, our ears, our taste, our smell, and our feeling, the things we can feel. So that these are the 5 senses. Now, in whichever way you can sense a reality, no matter how much you keep sensing it, you won't be able to determine what that thing is. You won't be able to determine what that thing is. And because of that, you need something else to compensate for it. You need something to compensate for that. Because ultimately, you need something that will help you judge, that will help you decide about that very thing. And the fact that, and why do you need to judge it? Why do you need to determine whether you like it or not, whether you want it, whether you want that person or thing to be a part of your life or not? It's because you interact with it. And the moment you start interacting with something, it becomes inevitable for you to choose whether you want it to be a part of your life or not, whether you like it or not, whether it's good or bad, all these things, you know, that dichotomy of good and evil, good and evil, right and wrong, etc. Things like that. And which is why just sensing the reality, so just having the, being present in the reality itself and the presence of senses, they are not enough. And the brain itself, because our senses send signal directly to our brain, which is why when we touch something, we feel it. It's the brain responding, okay? And when your senses are not functioning, for instance, sometimes someone might put a needle in if there are doctors here, sometimes doctors will, if someone has like a form of paralysis or a form of sickness, they come hitting his bones or some parts of his body to determine if there is a feeling. It's simply because it's not that there is no feeling or contact, but the person doesn't feel like there is contact. He can see with his own eye that the doctor is touching his hands, is touching his maybe legs or somewhere, but he can't tell by just the doctor touching him. Whereas normally, as a normal human being, when someone touches you, you don't have to see him to know that someone is touching you because you feel it. When you lose a sense of feeling in a particular place, your brain stops responding. So your brain is actually quite useless without the senses, which is why the hierarchy is that your senses, your sense faculty transfers that reality to your brain. And that's the only use your brain has to signal to you, okay, hey, something is coming, okay? But the brain does not have the capability to determine actually what it is. It doesn't. Rather, what it does have is to just give you a signal. And that is, the other thing we need is the previous information, as we mentioned in the definition. That's where the previous information comes in. The previous information is nothing but the explanation of that reality, or you could say the knowledge of that reality. Now, this brings us to why is it that we tend to differentiate between the word thought and idea? Because in this case, an idea is just an explanation of reality. Okay? An idea is just an explanation of reality. Now, that explanation of reality could be right and it could be wrong. Okay? How do we determine it is right and wrong? Depends on several parameters, which also depend on the field we are trying to judge. But generally, when we are having a rational discussion, it's something that has to do with compatibility with reality and so on. But the focus of our discussion here is that the difference between thought and ideas is that ideas are just explanations of reality, we might agree or disagree with them, meaning they are just ideas, are just information stored in our memory. We may agree or disagree with them. That's just what an idea is. But a thought does not stop there. After the transfer of this reality so after the transfer of the reality through the senses to the brain, this idea helps us describe that reality. And when we agree with the explanation of this reality and accept it and embrace it, it becomes a thought. This is because it immediately generates a concept. And a concept is something, it's like you visualizing something. It's like it's like visualizing the reality of a matter, because it might be something you cannot directly sense, but the explanation you have for that reality helped you drive the truth of that matter. And with that, you accept it as something you believe in or something you agree with, something you choose to, something you determine to be true. And with this, it becomes a concept. Why? Because it is not just an idea you know. It's not just an idea you are aware of. It's not just knowledge. It's something you also accept to be true. Okay? It's something you accept to be true. And by it being true, it influences the way you behave. And because it influences the way you, and that's the general connection. So, as I said, revival has to do with influencing the way a person behaves. The way a nation behaves is determined by them being revived or not. It's determined by their ideas, okay, by their thoughts about things. And these thoughts, and this is because thoughts generate understanding. And understandings, but not just merely understandings, because you might understand something and decide to disagree with it. It's like you understanding capitalism or communism or liberal ideas like feminism and atheism and dialectical materialism. You might be able to understand all that, but it doesn't mean you believe in it. Okay? But guess what? You disbelieving in capitalism and its secular ideas, or communism and its dialectical materialism, it's actually a thought. But wait a minute, I just said that you have to believe in it. That's because your understanding of capitalism, communism, leads to the concept that makes you believe you shouldn't act according to these liberal or dialectical ideas. In the end, your understanding of it compared to an opposing idea, which is Islam, for instance, helps you determine whether to act based on liberalism or not. It's the same thing on the flip side, where you have capitalists that understand Islam probably more than most Muslims, but despite that, they stick to their liberal ideas and constantly criticize and condemn the values and ideas of Islam. So just because you have an idea, so just because you reject something doesn't mean it's not a thought. It actually influences your behavior, because without having the knowledge of something you disagree with, you might end up falling into the trap of acting according to it. Now, if you've noticed, we have shifted from just discussing questions and answers to how a person acts and behaves towards them. Because in the end, the thought about man, life, and the universe, what preceded this life and what comes after it, in the end, it's supposed to shape the way you behave in the world. And that's what it means to have a perspective. I might say it's as simple as that, okay? But but that's what it's all about. It's all about the way we behave. Now, this answers the question, actually, that what actually leads to revival. Although this is something we might have mentioned in the previous session, but it becomes clearer now that revived people that are revived, you determine that by their actions. But how do you do that? By linking their actions to their concepts and their thoughts. But a question remains: what of people that do behave, they do act, but they don't actually have concepts, they don't actually have ideas, they don't have thoughts? We like to say that declined nations are people that base their lives on superstitions or lack of ideas. Okay, we tend to say that. But then how is it that we say the revival or decline of people is determined by merely their actions? And how do we determine that they are revived or declined? We said that it's by relating their actions to their concepts. And the truth of the matter here is that actions are always connected to concepts, and concepts are always generated by thoughts. Okay, now the difference between the thoughts harbored by revived and declined people is determined by, first, how the thoughts were acquired; secondly, the matters the thoughts address and do not address. Because the lack of addressing a matter does not mean you leave it completely out of your life. As a matter of fact, not addressing it determines the nature of your understanding of this world. Okay, and this becomes obvious when we start answering the question of the relationship between man and what preceded this life. Is there a relationship between what came before this life and man, or is there a relationship between what came before my life and the universe with life, and so on? So you find out that people that agree that there is a relationship between what preceded this life and what comes after it, and people that add to that by accepting that there is a relationship not just between man and what came before this life, but my life and the universe all have a specific relationship with what came before this life. You find that these two categories are quite different in the way they see the world. So for instance, you might have, it's like we have Muslims, okay, among Muslims, just to make this clear, that there are Muslims that understand that their relationship with their creator is not just a relationship of creation and ibadah. They also understand that their action, meaning the life they live, okay, the life they live, their actions are contained within that life that they are living. So the actions that they undertook and the ones that they refuse, that they abstain from, are determined by their relationship with their Lord. There are Muslims like that. And then there are those that only accept their relationship with their creator, or only acknowledge or appreciate or let it affect their lives. These are just possibilities I'm mentioning. There are those, whatever the case, that only their belief in the creator as their creator, okay, them being the creatures of that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they only accept that relationship. And I'm not saying that they don't accept the other aspect. No, rather what affects their life, what influences their life, what has impact on their life, what makes sense to their life, is that simple belief in their creator, and they worship him. So you see, they pray, they give zakah. Some of them, they pray 5 times a day, even adding with the nawafil. They go to Hajj, they perform fasting, even adding with the nawafil. They go to Umar, which is also a nafila, and lots of things. But shift to the other aspect of life, you won't find that. Now, this might be confusing, as you would say, okay, it's just the individual that's not adhering to other aspects of Islam, which is quite understandable. But what of a creed that completely doesn't answer that question? That should be more clear, right? Because if you take Christianity, for instance, Christianity only answers the question of whether there is a creator and the relationship of man with that creator. And the relationship of man with that creator is nothing more than worshiping him in the church and observing certain very limited commandments. And this only have to do with the relationship between the man and his creator. But when it comes to the relationship between the man and himself, the the relationship between man and anything else, meaning part of his life, then the creator has no place in it. And it's and that is so not because Christianity addresses it and Christians do not adhere to it. No, because Christianity does not address it. Okay, Christianity does not address it. Even if it seems to do so, it is not part of its. It's not part of its fabric. It's not part of the fabric of Christianity. It's very basis, because as a basis, it's very spiritual and foundation. Now, I've gone all this far about explaining this so as we understand how thoughts affect our behavior and how they determine that a nation is revived or not. This is because thought generates concepts, and concepts shape our behavior. That's why even the way a certain people behave determines whether they are revived or not. And this actually answers the question we posed in the previous session, where we said, then, does it mean a nation that refuses to accept scientific progress, doesn't that indicate decline? And people like Ernest Renan and the enlightened and the so-called philosophers of the enlightened age, like Immanuel Kant, were of the view, and they aggressively promoted, that the fact that the Islamic State, the Uthmani Khilafah, refused certain scientific progresses shows their backwardness, meaning they are not a full civilization. In other words, they were not revived, and Islam is not capable of providing a progressive civilization, meaning Islam is unable to provide a revival. Okay, but this explanation that we give completely debunks that. This is because a nation behaves is determined by its concept. And what I'm saying right here now is that the refusal of the Islamic State, just as an example, at that time to accept or even pursue scientific progress at that time, is an indication of its decline in relating its behaviors to its concepts, which were generated by its thoughts. And this also quite elaborate why we say ideas are quite different from thoughts, because it's not that the knowledge was not there. It's not that the knowledge was not there, because if it wasn't there, if it was extinct or lost, we wouldn't have been able to access it in this day and age. The age of seeking revival and so on. We wouldn't know. It's not that it's not there. The knowledge was there, but it was mere information. Unfortunately, at the time, they were not able to process it into a concept. They didn't understand it as an explanation of reality, as a solution to reality. They didn't understand it as such, which is why it wasn't a concept to them. Although they believed in it, they preserved it as knowledge. They preserved it. Alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them. Okay, so I believe this quite clarifies the position of thought and how relevant it is to our behavior. Because the whole thing is, the way you should see it is that thought determines the way we behave. But how does it, what is the bridge between our behavior and the thought? They are the concepts. Because if we were to say just thought, then thought will remain like any other knowledge and idea. There is nothing to bridge it with our behavior. And what creates that bridge is nothing more than the concept. And this concept is the key. Concept that this middleman, okay, this middle object, this middle factor is the key to the difference between a revived people and a people that are not revived. But then another question arises. What if the people that have a thought, it leads to it leads to concepts about life, meaning it generates concepts for them, the way they view the world, and at the same time it influences their behavior, yet we still say that they are not revived? What of people like that? And I think we have answered that already, but I'll repeat it. It's because the answers, yes, they have thoughts, their thoughts generate concepts, and their concepts lead to revival. And their concepts influence their behavior. It does not lead to revival, excuse me. But The thoughts, as we said, are answers to certain questions, and they answered some questions without answering others. And that's why we previously mentioned that your answering and refusal to answer certain questions determine the way you view the world. And what we were referring to at the time was the concept. And the concept can be seen as just a perspective. The perspective might be limited and it might be global. It might be a global perspective, meaning giving you a wide perspective about the world, and it might give you a very limited perspective, which even if it gives you a global view, it's limited to certain aspects of life. So it's not completely like a way of life or anything like that. And which is why we have things like Islam is a complete way of life, capitalism is a complete way of life, communism is a complete way of life, Hinduism is not a complete way of life, Judaism is not a complete way of life, and things like that. So inshallah, I think we will stop here, and we will continue in the next section because it's already 9:10 and we are stopping by 9:30. So if anyone has any question or comment, please, the room for that is open, and I hope this was a bit beneficial, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Before someone comes up with a question or comment, there's a point here that the Sheikh makes. He says, so human behavior is linked to man's concepts, mafahim, and when we wish to change the behavior of the declined man and make it refined, it is imperative to change his concepts, mafahim, first. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Now this actually concludes the very point of all these lines, because it mentions why we need to understand, it clarifies why we need to understand the relationship between a man's behavior and his thoughts. And what establishes that relationship are the concepts. Now, why do we need to understand that? It's because if we are aiming to revive a people, we need to understand what led to their decline. And by this discussion, I hope it becomes clear that the people decline due to two things. One, because they have they have left their thoughts. They do not relate their actions to their thoughts, meaning their thoughts are no more conceptual to them. So even if they were revived, they start declining. This is because their lack of conceptualization leads to lapses in their actions, and they end up not doing certain key actions that preserve their civilization. And this was a case in point when at one point the Islamic State unfortunately stopped propagating, stopped expanding, stopped carrying out jihad, and even when it continued, it stopped promoting the jihad with the da'wah aspect, meaning the jihad was carried out, but the da'wah was not carried along with it. And this is a clear manifestation of lapse and a disconnection between the idea and the concept within the thought and our behavior, and that's due to the absence of conceptualization. It's as simple as that. So in order to change these people, what's needed is to reinforce that these thoughts, these ideas. Now, and the second thing that leads to people's decline is that the people completely do not even have a thought. This was the situation of the Arabs before the coming of Islam. Although they had prophets and messengers like Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Ismail, but when the Rasulullah came, they were already without any form of progressive thought. They were content with the enclave of Arab nations, Arab tribes there, and the coming of Islam was very strange and new to them. And the reason for that is that they were completely declined. Okay, they are completely declined they were they lacked thoughts completely. And these are the two reasons, or rather two ways you would find people that are declined. But in each case, the only way to revive them is by providing them with the thoughts, because these thoughts will change the way they see the world. And the moment it changes the way they see the world, it will affect their behavior, because then they will have new priorities. We see example in the person of the great Sahabi Mus'ab bin Umair. And if you look at even the West, if you look at the West, they were people that were completely ignorant, and just like the Arabs were. And with the coming of new, with their, with their, with their with their research into Greek philosophy and mixing them with other philosophies, they came up with a way of life, and this changed the way Europeans were, and that's why we see them the way they are today. The key and the only factor that led to their revival is their acquisition of thoughts, of ideas. Okay, but they were not merely ideas; they were thoughts, because they gave them a concept, they give them a perspective, and this perspective was not limited, it was a wide one. It was deep, so it led to, and it changed the way they behave, the way they see things. One day they were barbaric, and another they turned out to seem quite civilized, and if there is so that's it. Okay. Someone has a question. You can, Sheikh Nafiu, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please. And if you prefer typing it, it's also okay. It's also okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakumullah khairan, ya Sheikh. My question is that the verse you quoted in Surah Al-Rad, that Allah will not change the situation of people until they change what is within themselves.
That's true.
Yeah. Most of the times when I am in a discussion with people and I discuss why we need to work for the return of Islam, and also to change the situation of the people by changing their thoughts and everything, and I come up with this verse of the Quran, and usually what I get at the end of the day is that Allah is referring to oneself, that jihad enough, that you need to fight with yourself, you need to change your own soul, your own self, that you need to go by the way of Allah, you need to be, this concept of being
self-preservation.
Yeah, exactly. So these are some of the things that I get at the end of the day, and I usually try as much as possible to try and explain my own view, and fine, they are right at the same time, that you have to be upright, you have to understand your deen, you have to be this, you have to be conscious of your deen in every way. But when it comes to the matter of relating it to the states and why we need to work to restore or to bring back the system, this is where they get it wrong. In this kind of situation, this is my question now. How do we try to make them come back to their senses and try to reason alongside with us?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Okay. Now, clearly you have come across textual brothers. And it's not a bad thing. As you mentioned, the Muslim has to be very conscious of his personality, meaning his spiritual upliftment and his soul. And but Usually what this point means, and this is what we meant when we say that, for instance, Christianity uh, relates to the relationship between man and his creator, and it stops there, whereas Islam goes beyond that. Now Islam, the fact that Islam goes beyond just the relationship between man and his creator, it, it's because Islam understands the nature of man more than himself. Okay? And by doing that, it determines that the safety of that individual himself is determined by the safety of the whole nation. If you look at this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma bi fardin aw ma bi shakhsin aw ma bi ahadin. He said, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma bi qawmin. The word qawm has never been used to represent a single individual in Arabic, in the Quran. The word qawm is used to represent a community, a nation, a whole nation. Okay? So if you were to get very textual, you realize even the verse debunks the idea that that is all about the individual. But the point here is that first we need to, in order to convince that person, I would avoid getting very textual, because if you were to get textual, he will keep quoting verses that seem to support his point, but in reality they do not. And I will go through both the rational and textual aspect. And the rational aspects, mind you, are based on the textual aspect. So first, let's understand the textual aspect. Actually, in a hadith, the Rasulullah said the example of the people that maintain the hudud of Allah, the limit of Allah, meaning a society that lives according to the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it means. The example of people that maintain the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning they live according to the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like the example of people living on a ship that has one level ahead. So it has an upstairs. Okay, so it has a lower deck and an upper deck. The Sallallahu said, when the people from the lower deck need water, they need to seek it from the people from the upper deck. Now, if the people from the upper deck decide, you know what, we shouldn't disturb the people from the upper deck, let's just poke a hole, let's pierce a hole at the bottom of the ship, and then we will acquire water. If the people at the upper part of the deck allow the people at the lower part of the deck to commit that action, who will be destroyed? Is it just the people at the lower deck or the people at the upper deck? Because we need to understand something. The people committing the crime, if we might say so, are the people at the lower deck. They are the ones, at least we might say they are committing a mistake, okay? So they are the ones committing the mistake. Now, if the people at the upper deck maintain themselves, preserve themselves, and when I say preserve themselves, they prevent themselves from committing that crime, and they let those people at the lower deck commit that mistake, will it destroy only the people at the lower deck, or will it destroy everyone on the ship? We all know the answer. It will destroy everyone on the ship. And this is the example of a society. The way Islam views society, it's that a single individual committing a mistake is not as bad as a single individual preserving himself does not save him from destruction along with the community. This is because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara wa quduha an-nas wal hijara, he was not saying, okay, just preserve yourself and your family alone. Rather, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, okay, now it's clearly saying preserve yourselves, your family, protect yourself from anar, from punishment, from sinning. That's clearly what it's saying. But how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does Islam, how does the Sharia, how did Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam define preserving ourselves? How did it define preserving the community? It's by preserving the individuals as a whole. Yes, that's what it is. Meaning preserving, it's not just about fixing one person or fixing ourselves, because no matter how we fix ourselves, there are others that might be committing that mistake, that are likely committing that mistake, and the effect of their action will end up destroying us and our own. The best, the clearest example I like to give is this. Let's assume you live in an area, and where you live, you are a sheikh, very spiritual, very soulful, okay, if there's such a word. And your children have all memorized the Quran at a young age. But then there is a club, there is a party club 1 kilometer or 500 meters away from your house. And your children will hear the song from this neighborhood. They are playing Whiskey, they are playing Davido, they are playing all those schmucks on the from that neighborhood. When they go out, they see their mates, the people from the neighborhood, people they know, going to that party club. Now you might try as best as you can to force them or to convince them or to prevent them from going there. If you're lucky, they will not. But how sure are you that the things that are happening outside will not have influence on them? Are you going to isolate them from going outside or not? Now, this is the perfect example that debunks the understanding that you have to preserve yourself alone. Because in preserving yourself, you allow other kids, preserving yourself and your children, for instance, you are allowing other kids to be spoiled. And when they get spoiled, they, and God forbid, will end up spoiling your own children, if not yourself. Okay, this is the perfect example. And that hadith, it's like the epitome of how society in Islam is. Because no matter how individuals perfect themselves, they are merely a part of a community. They are merely a part of a society. What determines the nature of that society are the systems that are implemented in that society. Without these systems, the individuals, without the presence of the Islamic system in this case, people will be more likely to adhere to the non-Islamic systems. And this is just the reality of it. So if you were to look at the textual aspect, trust me, no matter how many evidences you quote, it will likely lead to more debates. But a more clearer way is explaining the reality that these evidences apply. Because the more you argue quoting verses, the person you're discussing with will be assuming that you're actually saying that these verses are not true, or these ahadith are not true. Of course, that's not your intention. That's not what you're saying. But that's the likely thing that person will assume you're saying. So first, you need to establish the reality we are discussing. This is the reality. There's a lot of physics out there. Everyone agrees to that. There are a lot of party clubs, for instance, out there. There are a lot of misbehaviors out there. There are a lot of hurumat out there. Do we all agree on that? Okay. And this is because the system we live according to allows all these things. Because if you as a parent, for instance, prohibit it, the government allows it. Maybe the government might not allow and announce it, but it's within their constitutional rights. Nobody would say it's constitutionally disallowed or prohibited not to go to a party if you are 18 or is it 20 in Nigeria, the PAPE. And that's what matters, because if the government allows it, the more you are preaching to people to preserve themselves, the more the system itself preaches. And the system preaches by implementing its ideas, its values, its policies. Now, which one has the stronger influence? What we need to understand is that just as the individual has his own aqidah, the society has its own aqidah as well. So yes, let's preserve Tawheed, let's preserve our aqidah, our iman. But does your aqidah have more influence than the societal aqidah? Does your individual aqidah has more influence than the societal aqidah? No, it doesn't. But the bottom of the matter is that this long debates about whether we should fix the individual or fix the society usually comes along when there is misunderstanding of the reality from the part of the person you're discussing with. Because clearly you're trying to get him to understand, okay, my brother, The society needs to be fixed from a systemic perspective. The people are not committing sins just because they are absolutely evil. No, it's because of the overwhelming influence of the system. And now, and it's not that you're giving the people excuses. No, but you are being considerate. That's something else. You are being considerate that the system is influencing. It's bringing it out in the open. And another clear evidence is that if you notice, Islam usually asks you to distance yourself from haram. It doesn't just tells you to not do something. For instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. La taqrabu is not la taf'alu. It's different. La taf'alu is saying don't do it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say that. He said, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Do not come close to it, meaning anything that will tempt you, anything that will instigate the reproductive instinct for it to be satisfied in an illegal way, do not come close to it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us we must prevent ourselves from anything that will trigger that. But the society we live in today not only draws us closer to it, it forces it on us. It forces it on us. Maybe in our society here today, there are things that are yet to come, liberal views that are yet to come. And it's not that we are praying that they come, but if you look at other places, it's rampant. As a Muslim parent, you try, for instance, to force your child, your female child, to wear a complete Islamic dress, she might report you to the courts, and there's nothing you can do about it. There might be even a restraining order. You might be kicked out of your own very house, your very own house. This is the reality of it. Now, it might not be happening in places like Nigeria, but what's happening is that the system, the establishment, which is based on a kufr system of liberalism, is actively promoting these un-Islamic ideas. Now, the fact that they are promoting it, is that not breaking the rule of وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا? So I understand, yes, let's preserve our iman. But what do we do about وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said? If you look at the ahkam of, okay, so there is just a lot of things to look at from this matter. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us. Okay, there is another question that's written by Brother Abdul Wahab. His audio mic his mic is not working, so I will read out the question. He said, my question is regarding the reality of this understanding in the Muslims under the Islamic State. Do they have to go through the process of this education in detail like we are doing now, or does living under Islam naturally manifest such thoughts and hence influence their behavior? This is actually a very good question. And this is what we mean by carrying Islam, promoting Islam through as an ideology. Because no, they don't necessarily have to go through a rigorous session like this or halaqat that we do. They might not have to, but through through two things will help people understand these things. The first is the implementation of Islam, which is the practical da'wah. This is a way of promoting an idea that affects not just Muslims, but even non-Muslims. As a result of the implementation of Islam, we have had non-Muslims writing about Islamic fiqh in the past. And they wrote very impressive books. And the only reason we are not using them today is that is the condition in Islam that anything that has to do with the text, anything that has to do with the Sharia, Aqidah has to be taken from the Muslims. Okay, but there were non-Muslims that have actually wrote very impressive Islamic fiqh books simply because they were living under Islam and it influenced them. The second way of promoting ideas and these concepts and understanding, it's by actively promoting it and teaching it through the education system, government-sponsored activities, and even foreign relationships, because it's all part of promoting the idea of it. And just look at it today. if you meet a kid that is that attends like maybe junior secondary school and ask him the tier of governments, even if maybe he might not understand that wording, but he does know that there is a president, there is a vice president, there are governors, there are deputy governors, there are members of representatives, there are senators, federal and state members of the Senate and Parliament, etc. He did not have to attend any class. He did not have to go to school. Some have never even attended any kind of school, any formal academic school, but they know all this. Why? Because it's their reality, it's implemented. Okay, so it's the same thing under the Islamic system, inshallah. Under the Islamic state, just the mere implementation and the active promotion by the state and activists and Islamic activists will inshallah raise this awareness. The reason today we are unable to achieve that is because the establishment is based on something else. It's based on kufr and it's promoting kufr. So people are more aware about un-Islamic ideas, like liberal ideas, without even knowing whether they are liberal or not, but they do know about the ideas, and unfortunately some are influenced by it. It's simply because it's implemented, it's practical, it's there, people see its reality. And in Islam and about the Islamic ideas, we don't really do. And that's why. Is there any question? I hope this answers your two questions. The two questions that were, I hope these answers them, inshallah. Okay, so if there isn't any question, inshallah, I think we'll stop here. Okay, great. We're I hope this. Okay, inshallah, we'll stop here and we will continue next week. The time for this session has been shifted from 8:15 to 8:30 due to the shift in the time of prayer. And okay, someone is just coming in. So inshallah, we'll stop here and we'll continue next week. Jazakumullahu bi khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
خير السلام عليكم.